May the blessing of the Holy Trinity the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Descend upon this host, and may it remain forever. The body and the blood of Christ. All right, you guys can all begin to come back. We'll be in the Gospel of John. Get back to a regular class this time. And we're going to be in the Gospel of John, chapter 9. And I'll go ahead and read this. It's just one story. So we'll read the whole chapter 9, all the way till 10. It's a little bit of a read because it's just a specific miracle, and we don't want to break that into pieces. There's no reason to break it into smaller pieces. Now, as Jesus passed by, he saw a man who was born blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, saying, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, Neither this man nor his parents sinned, but that the works of God should be revealed in him. I must work the works of God who sent me while it is day. The night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. When he had said these things, he spat on the ground and made clay with the saliva, and he anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay. And he said to him, Go wash in the pool of Siloam, which is translated sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. Therefore, the neighbors, those who previously had seen that he was blind, said, Is not this he who sat and begged? Some said, This is he. Others said, He is like him. He said, I am he. Therefore they said to him, How were your eyes opened? He answered and said, A man called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and said to me, Go to the pool of Siloam and wash. So I went and washed, and I received sight. Then they said to him, Where is he? He said, I do not know. They brought him who formerly was blind to the Pharisees. Now it was a Sabbath when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. Then the Pharisees also asked him again how he had received his sight. He said to them, He put clay on my eyes, and I washed, and I see. Therefore some of the Pharisees said, This man is not from God, because he does not keep the Sabbath. Others said, How can a man who is a sinner do such signs? And there was a division among them. They said to the blind man again, What do you say about him, because he opened your eyes? The man said, He is a prophet. But the Jews did not believe concerning him, that he had been blind and received his sight, until they called the parents of him who had received his sight. And they asked him, saying, "Is this your son, who you say was born blind? How then does he now see?" His parents answered them and said, "We know that this is our son, and that he was born blind. But by what means he now sees we do not know, or who opened his eyes we do not know. He is of age. Ask him, he will speak for himself." His parents said these things because they feared the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that if anyone confessed that he was Christ, he would be put out of the synagogue. Therefore his parents said, "He is of age, ask him." So they again called the man who was blind and said to him, "Give God the glory. We know that this man is a sinner." He answered and said, "Whether he is a sinner or not, I do not know. One thing I know, that though I was blind, now I see." Then they said to him again, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered them, "I told you already, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples?" Then they reviled him and said, "You are his disciple, but we are Moses' disciples. We know that God spoke to Moses. As for this fellow, we do not know where he is from." The man answered and said to them, "Why, this is a marvelous thing, that you do not know where he is from, and yet he has opened my eyes. Now we know that God does not hear sinners, but if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, he hears him. Since the world began, it has been unheard of that anyone opened the eyes of one who was born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." They answered and said to him, "You were completely born in sins, and are you teaching us?" And they cast him out. Jesus heard that they had cast him out, and went and found him, and said to him, "Do you believe in the Son of God?" He answered and said, "Who is he, Lord, that I may believe in him?" And Jesus said to him, "You have both seen him, and it is he who is talking with you." Then he said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped him. And Jesus said, "For judgment I have come into this world, that those who do not see may see, and that those who see may be made blind." Then some of the Pharisees who were with him heard these words and said to him, "Are we blind also?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would have no sin. But now you say we see. Therefore your sin remains." Just give you a minute or so to sit with that before we comment on it. Okay, we can get to the commentary part of the class. It's good to see you all again. I'm so glad we're here doing this. I thought maybe an update. If all goes well, the country should be vaccinated by late summer or early fall at the latest. That's what they're saying now. And you know what that means? That means that we will be back in the center by the end of summer, it looks like. And isn't that wonderful? So just know that there's an end coming. We're going to be able to meet in person again and be together and continue what we've begun together. And we've held it together here through COVID. And I'm just so grateful to everybody. And don't now slip away. Just let's keep this thing together and going. And just quite soon, really, not too far away now. And we will all be back in the center, meeting together, meditating together, and able to have that type of community. So we're on the way back, and that's really good news. Okay, so we're going to comment on this story, and it's the healing of the blind man, and the first thing that we want to talk about from this story is the Jewish peoples asked Jesus, who sinned that this man would be born blind? And so that reveals, if they're asking that question, then you know that they have a pre-existing notion that somebody sinned, right? In order for this man to be born blind. And at the time, what the scholars tell us is that at the time, in Jesus' day, at that time, that the Jewish peoples had slipped into this sort of assumptive position where they believed that if there was misfortune in a person's life, whether it was tragedy or great misfortune or illness, that it was because of personal sin, usually that person's sin, but sometimes they might say it's because of their parents' sin. And we know, that ultimately in this world, we know that if there was no sin in the world, that most suffering would disappear. So you can see how it makes sense. It's a leap, and they go too far, and it becomes assumptive and arrogant in a way to start thinking exactly what sins cause what illness. But you can see how they came to a notion that illness is related to sin, because really it is. And we know that because of the power and transformation that we undergo as we become closer to God. And it becomes really easy to see that if there were no sin in the world, everyone would be like Christ, right? Everyone would be like Mother Mary. Everyone would be so bright and so powerful and so transformed that most of human suffering would fall away. And so you can see how easy it is to slip into a place where, we know that illness and tragedy is related to sin. So now, if that tragedy happens to you, you must have sinned personally. And of course, Jesus says no one sinned. This was so that God's work could be revealed. And so what Christianity has done with that is they've taken that out and said, okay, then we now, and because of many other scriptures also, we know that Jesus did not equate illness with sin directly in a specific person. And this is important because there's a sickness in the human mind, and it exists today in a number of ways. That there's a sickness in the human mind that wants to see the other who has experienced tragedy as being personally at fault for having experienced tragedy. And it could be financial ruin. It could be some kind of a serious illness or accident that comes, or some other kind of misfortune. And there's this part of us that doesn't like uncertainty. There's a part of us that wants to know the causes of everything. And so there's a part of us that wants to just say, well, that person must have done something wrong, or this would not have happened to them. And we know that is sometimes true. But here we have one of the precedents for Christianity saying, no, we don't accept that every time you become ill, it's because you personally did some kind of sin, and that's why you're ill. And you could see how pernicious and vicious that kind of thinking would be were we to adopt it. Then if you're lucky, if you're genetically lucky, or if you're born wealthy, or if you're born in a certain part of the world, or in the right family, then it could be quite easy to sail through life without any kind of tragedy on these levels. And that would be proof to you that you haven't sinned. And others around you who you saw in financial difficulty or in illness, you could say, well, that's their own personal sin. And you could see how vicious and ugly that belief system is. And I wanted to draw barely a parallel to today. It's no big thing, but there is a growing sickness in the human mind, in our country, and it may exist in other countries. I know it's here in the States. There is a real growing sickness in people's minds that if somebody has not attained wealth, that they have somehow failed in life. Or that if somebody is unemployed, they have failed in life. And they're just, I can see it creeping in. I don't know anyone personally who's thinking this way, but I'm aware through articles, reading news, things like that. I'm aware that there's this growing sentiment in a certain segment of the population to see tragedy as the fault of the person who is experiencing that tragedy. And it is growing and taking root enough that even sometimes on the part of the person who has experienced that tragedy, they will frame that in their minds as if they have personally failed. And this is a very dangerous way to think and view the world, and ultimately one that leads to nihilism and a loss of self-esteem and self-respect. And so we should all be very vigilant not to, it's in the air now. It's in the air. And so we should all be very vigilant to never allow that thinking to become a part of our consciousness. And it is there are cities in the country where all of manufacturing jobs have been shipped overseas, and there are whole cities that have been laid to waste. First of all, because of the financial crisis that happened, years ago, and then also because all the jobs have been shipped overseas, and there are entire cities of people who are left with really no meaningful employment. This is not because of their personal sin, right? This is not because they're not thrifty. This isn't because they're not trying. This is because of systemic injustice that has harmed people. And so we have to be very careful that we don't fall into this same trap. Someone gets ill, someone has an accident, somebody has some kind of tragedy, and we need to be very, very careful that we don't fall into this human temptation to begin to view what happened to them as personally as a result of their own personal sin. We have to be very careful about that. We want to not be arrogant enough to assume we know so much. And we have to understand that if there is personal sin, there is systemic sin. And that people can be affected by systemic sin in a way that they're not personally culpable for. It's very important, and that's one of the principles that we draw from here. And just, me coming from the New Age movement, and I can't speak for the entire movement, obviously, but just my little stream of consciousness that I was a part of in that system, there was a pretty strong bias towards this kind of wrong thinking towards illness. I didn't know a lot of people that had sort of I met people that were into the abundance spirituality movement who believed that if you were plugging in correctly to spirituality, then wealth would come your way. But I didn't run in those circles. The people I ran with were much less materially oriented and materially focused. And I also think, generally speaking, a lot more sincere about their spiritual development and spiritual search. And but still, even within those circles, there was this thing where if you were sick, you just didn't want to face anyone because someone was going to say, "Oh, you're sick, huh? So what did you do wrong that you got sick?" and even if you didn't believe that was true, there was just a sort of energy in the culture that was very likely to blame illness on personal disorder within yourself. And, in this sort of notion that there was a way to live perfectly balanced and you'd never get sick. And, as with everything that isn't true, people wouldn't believe lies or false truths unless there was a grain of truth in it. And so, we do know that when you stay in balance and live well, you get sick less. I mean, you get sick less than you would get sick if you were living out of balance. But again, we know that you can't live so in balance that everybody would never get sick. We're not there. Certainly you could become enlightened and maybe get sick less. But even then, we find enlightened people getting sick. And also, none of the people who were accusing everyone who got sick of being in disorder were themselves enlightened. And so you can see what a vicious and disempowering and disruptive belief system it would be to assign tragedy or illness to sin, to specific sin in specific people. So then that would obviously mean also that books that say if you get a cold it means this, and if you get the flu it means this, and if you break your left toe it means this, those books go too far. They take something that is somewhat true, make it completely true, extrapolate on that, and make a fantasy spirituality out of it. Then if you end up following that, you're working bad theology. And you're living according to bad theology, and then that can become a chase to try to get fruit from something that ultimately is not going to produce fruit. Okay, so that's just one piece. Let me just check my notes here. Okay, so then there's the question of, so what are all the causes of suffering? And we know that original sin is a cause of a lot of suffering, but within the context of salvation, what is the cause of suffering? And I'm not trying to be thorough here, but I want to just say one thing, which is, this last year has been pretty good for me. I think COVID has helped me a lot, even though it's such a tragedy and so many people have died and we'd never want it to come. But having to isolate has been, for me, really good. And I've had, my spirituality has flowered in some ways, and I have a lot of work to do, as we all do, So I'm not claiming some kind of enlightenment or anything like that, but it's just been wonderful. And one of the things that I can see so clearly now is that some of the deepest causes of pain and suffering in my psyche, things I was born with, or that I inherited from my parents so early I had no choice about. And also some of the physical limitations and tragedies that I've experienced. I can now, with there's a lot of hindsight now. I'm 48 years old. I can look back upon my life. It seems to be flowering. It seems to be growing into fruition. And I can look back and say, well, how did I get here? And of course, well, God. But I mean, yes, but what specifically did God do, and in what ways? And I just want to say that as a human being who is broken, and as a human being who is in deep and profound need of redemption and salvation, who inherited wounds from upbringing, a specific set of wounds, who as a person with a specific personality, who interacted with upbringing in specific ways, that I just want to say that some of the deepest causes of pain in my life have proven to be tremendous gifts. And I think that bears thought. It's worth thinking about. So, the cross that we bear, it's like Jesus goes to the cross and is crucified on the cross, right? The worst the world can throw at him. And that becomes his salvation, right? Well, our salvation. That becomes his death, but then his resurrection and his ascension. And the thing that the world threw at him, this specter of dying on the cross, becomes for us a symbol of redemption and salvation to the world. And that's the way God works. So there is sin in the world. The devil is even involved in a lot of this sin, certainly involved in hanging Jesus on the cross, and certainly the devil was involved in the wounds that I received, right, which were passed down sometimes generationally. Certainly my parents were not monsters of any kind. They also received and inherited wounds, and I think they passed on less of those wounds to me than some of their experiences passed on to them. But the point I'm trying to make is that I was wounded by the world. I inherited certain physical limitations, mental limitations, right? There's just a certain organization there that you get. It's roll the dice, it's genetics. And everything that has brought me the most suffering has, in a way that seems utterly perfect, influenced, I would say even orchestrated, some of the ways in which grace and my own efforts have moved me through the world towards a deeper experience of God. Towards a deeper experience of God. And I think now of things that used to really make me so upset, used to bother me so much about the way the dice that I was rolled in life. I can see those things now as having, because of my own personal sin, because of my own ambition, because of my own desires, because of my own self-will, those things tempered me, kept me in check in certain ways, and saved me from even more suffering. And it is as clear as daylight that is true. And because of that, that vision I've begun to see. It's not that I just saw this in the last year, but it's really become clear in the last year. I've begun to see it in others. I've begun to see that whatever this cross is, that this person must bear, right? What is their wall, their dark night of the soul, the wall, from the critical journey, whatever that is, it is because it is the worst the devil can throw at them, and because it's so prescient in their life, because it's so there that you can't not have it there, because it's so there that you can't not see it, because it's so there that you can't not be deeply marked by it. Because of that, God uses that very thing to bless the person and to take them into union. So that, just like the cross, right? So that the worst the devil can throw at the world, God turns into a path of redemption. The worst that God and the worst that the world threw at you becomes the way in which you come into union with God and interacts perfectly with who you are to, in a way, serve you in coming towards God. And, when the devil tries to cause harm in a specific person, it's based on insight. The devil knows what would trigger this person, knows how to get in there. So it's personal, right? The devil works with you in a personal way. And God takes that personal assault, that personal insult, that personal tragedy or harm, and turns that into a personal healing, a personal transformation that leads to a greater union with God. And so, who sinned that this man might be born blind? Nobody sinned. It was so that God's light might be revealed in the world through him. And that's you. That's your personal sin. That's your wall, your cross to bear, your tragedy. And whatever is now accursing you will, if you stay vigilant to the path, and especially if you follow the last piece of advice he gives in this story, of admitting what's wrong, seeing it. If you remain vigilant to the path, whatever curses you have, whatever crosses you have to bear, will become your path to enlightenment and freedom. And could God do it another way? Sure. But because it's so there, because you can't wake up without it there, God uses it to take you into union. You transform through it, wounded by it, humbled by it, tempered by it, in ways I'm sure I don't understand, just the little ways I see in my life, but in your life too. So whatever cross it is that you have to bear in this life, just know that that cross is your cross. And it is your symbol of, the devil sees it as a symbol of defeat, but God sees it as a symbol of triumph over the world. Triumph over the world. Okay. I had a lot more to say, but I don't want to. I realize that I've been talking too long. I want you to know it's mainly wanting to make sure I do a good job for you guys and make sure that you feel cared for and that I'm not in any way. I always want to make sure you guys feel like I'm showing up for you with the best that I can. But I realized I think I talked too long. And I didn't intend for this section to have so much weight to it. So I'll just quickly name a few things that I was going to go over into a little more detail, and then I want to talk about the last piece. So Jesus says, go and wash. And if you're a Jewish person of that time or a Christian trained in the Bible, you immediately recall the miracle of Naaman, the Syrian general who was cured of leprosy by washing Elisha, the prophet. There's Elijah and then there's Elisha who inherited Elijah's prophetic calling and who asked God for a double heaping of his spirit. And Elisha inherited that, and it does seem that he received a double heaping of his power. And so Elisha tells this Syrian general to go and wash in the pool of Siloam 7 times, and his leprosy will be cured. And so just so you know, when Jesus, a lot of what he does, it's like, why? Why did Jesus say go wash in the pool of Siloam? Why? I mean, did he need the guy to? I mean, maybe the person, the woman, man, child, whatever, maybe the person he was healing needed a magic trick to have the faith, right? So they needed the clay in the eyes and then go wash in the pool. But even then, Jesus is, a trip. I don't think he's like intellectually weighing everything out necessarily, but when he says go wash in the pool of Siloam, he knows that throughout history now people remember Elisha doing a similar thing. So just that recalls this story from the Old Testament. And then this miracle also by the, Christian tradition, the fathers, and all through history, this miracle is seen as a symbol for baptism, because he goes and washes in the pool of Siloam, which is, we instantly, wouldn't we think of baptism, being immersed in water and coming out and reborn and able to see. And isn't that what it's like to accept Christ into our lives and accept the good theology into our lives and to begin to see meaning and purpose and order in the world that we didn't see before, and also just the light of Christ, which enlightens our minds and changes the way we view things. And so that I was going to say a lot more, but I don't want to spend all night. So we'll move now. There's a big piece here about how do people, this story has sort of like the parents of the blind man, and then the Jewish leaders, and then, all interacting with Jesus. And because there's a number of characters and a number of different ways in which they react to Jesus, this is something you could read just with the thought in mind of how is it that people react to Christ in the world? And in this case, it's Jesus Christ. But in other cases, it could be Christ in the world through a certain preacher. Christ in the world through a world leader. Christ in the world through a political leader. And how is it that the world will react to Christ? And what we know is oftentimes not well. and because Jesus is such a radical figure, and because his power is so radical, it's very often the case that his power is rejected and pushed away. And that if someone is coming in the name of Christ, so if someone is very true, if someone is very, very true, if someone really comes in the name of the poor and the suffering and the downtrodden, then that person comes not in the name of the system, the culture, the society. They're anti-system, culture, and society in many ways. The more true a person is, the more likely it is that many people who occupy positions of power in whatever given system we're discussing will reject that person. Because someone who is true is calling into question the injustices that we allow, the injustices that we benefit from and so don't see, the injustices that we benefit from in many ways and don't want to admit to. But it doesn't have to be financial or anything like that. It can just be simply the social injustice of being in the in-group. And I've seen this a lot in my life. I've always been an outsider, and it's been one of the crosses that I've had to bear that's been just wonderful. It's been nothing but a gift. I'm so glad that I never quite fit. It is so wonderful. But it has allowed me to see sometimes that just social status itself within a group is often cruel and vicious. In order for there to be an in-group, there has to be an out-group, right? There has to be the in and the out. And there's a cruelty and a viciousness in who is out. And these are good people in the in-group. But there's an incentive not to see that cruelty and that viciousness. Because to see it would be to call into question their standing. And they've falsely built their self-esteem upon this standing in this system, group, class, whatever. So now, because of idolatry, because God isn't the foundation of our being, because God isn't the foundation of our self-esteem, because God isn't the foundation of our purpose, now we've got to protect this false thing that we've gained our esteem and our purpose from. So now all of a sudden, a person who calls into question in any fundamental way what we've built our entire self-esteem and position on becomes a threat. And so oftentimes the way Christ is perceived in the world is as a threat that must be killed, that must be expelled, that must be cast out. And in this case, with the Jewish leaders, they were probably fanatics. I mean, the best way to describe them is they were fanatics. And that doesn't mean they walked around acting crazy. What it means is they had become so invested in their position and in their religion being true and right, and the Jewish religion is true and right, but not the way they were doing it. They had become so invested in it that it really had become almost just a binary thing for them. You're either with us and you're right, or you're against us and wrong. You're either with us and good, or you're against us and evil. And that kind of, when you find black and white thinking, you find someone who's really slipped into wrong think, right? Because anyone of any maturity, like if all of us can meet, let's say we're meeting finally back at the center, let's say we have 25 people, full class. Everyone is there on the same night. We're all meditating. How far do you think we have to travel to find evil in the world? Do we have to get out of the center and out of the property and into, the neighborhood? Well, no. We don't have to get out of our own bodies to find evil, do we? But fanaticism, it loses that subtlety. It loses that gray area. It loses this notion that evil is everywhere and good is everywhere too. And it just gets binary, black and white. Good here, bad there. Good in my group, bad in that group. And the Jewish leaders had fallen into that. And they cast this guy out. All he did was get healed by Jesus. I think he first sees Jesus as a man. I'm not going to go check through. Don't want to waste time. Then a prophet, and then he worships him. This is his evolution in who he sees Jesus to be. The Jewish leaders are trying to find a way. They're trying to bully him, really, into giving God the credit. That's sort of like a turn of speech. They're exhorting him to not give Jesus the credit for this. Come on, get real. But the guy won't do it because he's just saying, look, this is what happened. This guy healed me. He did. And because he won't be bullied, because he won't lie about who Jesus is to save the system, right? To save their self-esteem, their position, this thing they've come to love because of idolatry. He must be cast out. And there were two ways to be cast out back then: 30 days, a warning, or permanent. And scholars believe he was cast out permanently from the temple for being cured by Jesus and for not denying that Jesus was the one who did it and that Jesus was good, and maybe for beginning to see him as Savior and beginning to worship him. So these are fanatics. The fanatics kicked out Christ. They're trying to find a way to get rid of Jesus, right? Because Jesus is a threat. Jesus is a threat to you right now too. Jesus is a threat to anyone who wants anything more than Jesus. Because we're all human. We all must get esteem. We all must get worth. We all must get purpose. Right? We all must get direction. We all must fit in somewhere or try. Some of us never do, but we try. We all want these things. And to the degree that we get any of those things through anything other than God, then to that degree, Jesus is a threat to our entire foundation, which is why sometimes it feels so shaky when we're being changed, because we've placed our affections and our attention and our dignity and our worth in something less than Christ, something less than God. And because of that, we get really threatened. And it could be, it could be that I like Ford trucks better than Chevy trucks. I mean, it can be that meaningless. It can be as meaningless as this is my football team and that's your football team, right? It can be as meaningless as that, all the way to something seemingly as meaningful as this is my religion and that is your religion, or this is my political party and that's your political party, or this is my race and that's your race, right? This is all idolatry. This is all human beings are looking for security. There's only one place to find it. When you place it in anything other than that one place that is perfect, then your security is imperfect also. Okay. And then something just quickly, the Jewish leaders, it doesn't look to me like it doesn't seem to me that they really wanted to see who Jesus was, does it? It doesn't seem as if they're even questioning in order to come to the truth. It seems as if they're questioning to create doubt and to sow discontent and to poison Jesus's reputation and image. It doesn't seem as if they're even looking to see the truth. They seem to be so embedded in their position, their false position, that even the idea of seeing the truth is possibly unheard of to them. It could be something they don't even want, and it doesn't seem to me that they did. Okay, so that's that. And then, so this is it. This is the final thing, and it doesn't have to take a long time, but man, can we all hear this and just revel in this and just sink our teeth into it and love it. Jesus says, I came that those who do not see may see, and that those who see may be made blind. And then right after that, he tells these people, the Pharisees say, are we blind? And Jesus says, I'm not quoting him, he says, if you were blind, you would have no sin. But because you say we see, your sin remains. And this is very powerful. This is very powerful. Now, in their specific case, they're saying we see while lying. See, remember now, they haven't even really entertained whether this is the Savior or not, whether Christ is of God or not. What they've done is he did it on the Sabbath, so they've used some technicality. He worked on the Sabbath to completely discredit him. So they're twisting and warping religion and God to cast out their best fruits. It's just sitting right there, Jesus, their best fruit ever. But these particular people are so wrapped up in their position of power and authority and all of that, which we discussed, that they must cast him out. And so they say, we see, right? We see. And so Jesus says, because you say we see, your sin remains. And then that implies, doesn't it, that if they said we don't understand, that their sin would be forgiven. It would be lifted. And so isn't that us? Isn't that it? Isn't that almost everything right there? If we can just admit when we're wrong completely with no defense. But to any degree that we're defending it, to that degree, the sin holds power over us. To the degree that we're afraid to see that, we just can't quite clearly look at the disorder and ugliness in our soul, and to the degree that we just can't bear to see it, to that degree that sin still dwells in us with power. With power. So that like almost everything of the path, it's such a big principle, right? As quickly as possible, admit you don't know. Admit you're wrong. Admit you're prideful. Admit you're lustful. I spoke to someone this week who was 11 years meditating and said that they noticed that they were really, I can't remember the language exactly, so if you're listening, bear with me. I didn't give your name, so it's okay, but it seemed like it was like because they're still rigid or stiff, or in self-will during meditation, they noticed they are. And they seemed, somewhat disappointed and dejected by that. And I had a completely different interpretation of I thought, well, I mean, of course you are. 11 years in, this person said 3 or 4 times, I'm 11 years in. How could I still be doing this? And I'm thinking from my position, how many years I am in, looking back at 11 years, I'm thinking, how could you not be? I mean, you're not walking on water. Why do you think that is? Right? I mean, you're not just sitting down and you can meditate 8 hours straight, no movement, and it feels like moments to you. Why? Why do you think that is? Because there's disorder, and some of it might be control. Some of it might be rigidity. And so, but the point is, this person, so humble, so willing to admit it, so willing to say it, that's all this person has to do, right? They just have to admit it deeply. Let go of any shame, because that's ego, right? That's ego. That's still defense. That's still trying to, I don't know. If you're ashamed of it, you haven't really found a deep humility about it yet. But shouldn't they just as quickly as possible say, yes, here I am trying to twist God's arm. Here I am still keeping God away while seeking God. And yes, that's me. And shouldn't they find a deeper humility 11 years in? And shouldn't they say, yes. 11 years in, and here I am still twisting God's arm. And anyone with maturity can say, yes, that person who can do that deserves praise. The person who can do that deserves praise. We should throw a party for that person. I almost said the gender. We should throw a party for them. Shouldn't we? Doesn't it even take more courage at 11 years in to admit this than at 1 year in? Right? I mean, isn't it so beautiful? So I'm listening to this person and thinking, good for you, man. That is really great. I mean, I am impressed. You're doing a great job here. There's a lot here that is commendable. A lot. But the devil's in there trying to trick it. And so that's really my message on that last segment of Jesus's words. Just admit you're blind, right? Admit your pride. Admit your jealousy. Admit your narcissism. Admit your aloofness. Admit it openly. Admit it freely to yourself especially and God. And then at least to one other, with you guys, it's me, but at least, but also maybe your spouse. Admit it openly and freely. Don't defend the thing that is keeping you from enlightenment. Don't defend it. Don't defend the very thing that is causing you misery. Don't protect it. And then I'm going to use my wife as an example for something, and I don't know if I have permission. I hope it's okay. So my wife, over the long haul, has proven to be a disciple of Christ and a genuine disciple of Christ. And she meditates, and anyone who has a spouse, it's not just my wife. She's not so neat, but anyone who has a spouse, you get used to just knowing someone that well and going, well, yeah, I mean, they're never, ever, they're just always going to see things I don't see and vice versa, right? But my wife came to be able to admit out loud certain defects of character slowly. It took her time. She's a prideful person, but what we found out, though, is that while it was very hard for her to admit it out loud to a person like me, I'm not her teacher, but this would be within marital discord, so she has to admit her part. It was hard for her to do that, but what we found out in the long run? It wasn't hard for her to admit that to God and to herself. She just had that little bit of pride admitting it to the person. And so while it looked like there was a lot of pride there, under the radar, there was a lot of growth there. And so I just wanted to say that as like, think of that example and now make up there's 15 others we didn't say, you're probably doing quite well, but just make sure that in your personal life, as quickly as possible, if you see disorder, just say yes. Yes. What do you have to be ashamed of? You have Christ. What do you have to feel guilty about? You've been redeemed. What do you have to fear? All things work within you towards enlightenment. What do you have to defend? In Christ, you need no defense. There's no one somewhere in the New Testament. It says, who can accuse you? Christ has acquitted you. That's not a direct quote. You're not guilty. You've been forgiven. Don't hide in the Garden of Eden from God. Don't hide. Run straight towards the light. Because all God wants to do is heal all of your suffering, all of your disorder, and take you into perfect and permanent happiness and love. With a cross. With a cross. With service in this world. With tribulation. Okay, that's everything. Thank everybody so much. Don't let's see. No, okay, so that's all. Thank you for donations. Just do that quickly and soon and generously. And let's continue moving just straight towards the light, wasting no time. But if you're wasting a little time, let that be okay too. All right.